Hello and welcome to this special program sponsored by City TV, Government Access Television, and the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne. We're going to be talking about the question, really, is local government reform necessary? That's the title of this half-hour show. I'm Vince Robinson. I'll be your host for this half hour. We're going to talk about government reform and really a controversy and questions that are going on all over the state about how to do it. In 2007, Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels formed the Indiana Commission for Local Government Reform. And that 7-member panel was really designed to come up with recommendations for how to restructure local government all across the state. We have two members of that panel with us in studio today. Rolland is the retired CEO and chairman of Lincoln National Corporation, a member of the commission, as well as John Stafford, who is director of the Community Research Institute at IPFW. Really want to get into the questions right away. We only have a half hour for this show, and this is really a overarching report, 27 recommendations on how to reform local government. And let's get right into it. What we want to talk about really is how the commission went about doing its business. This was a huge undertaking. Let's talk a little bit, and let me start with you, John. What were some of the guiding principles? When the governor gave you the task of doing this, what were you supposed to be thinking about in coming up with these recommendations?
Well, our charge was really quite simple, Vince. It was to take a look at the structure of local government in Indiana and make recommendations based on what the 7 of us thought the direction ought to be that we move forward in making some changes, and not to be constrained with what might be doable. Many of these recommendations, almost all, will require action by the General Assembly, but to look at what we thought really needed to be done with an eye to looking at making government more efficient, making best use of the taxpayers' dollars, but also to making government understandable. And those ideas come through in the guiding principles that really were the foundation of our work.
To kind of give people kind of the scope on what really was at stake here, according to the report, more than 3,000 units of local government, I think 11,000 elected officials. This is a massive task. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the committee itself. 7 people, but none of them elected office holders at the time.
Not at the time.
How was that? Who was named important to getting this done?
Well, it was a group of 7 of us that came from very different backgrounds. Many of the commission members had experience in government, had run for public office. Some had won elections, some had not won elections. Others, like myself, have been, I come out of business. And so I think the reason I was on the commission is because of the experiences I bring as a result of my involvement in the business community in terms of organizational structure and efficiency of operations. None of us represented a constituency. We all came as individuals to make up our own minds about what we felt was the right thing to do, and we weren't reporting back to any particular group of people that we represented. And I think that was a key to getting things done. Now, we can be criticized because certain groups weren't represented, but they'll get their opportunity as part of the dialogue that will result as a result of this report.
I want to ask you both briefly, knowing that this was going to be, whatever you did was going to be controversial, whatever you did was going to be criticized, do either of you have any hesitation before even joining the commission?
I didn't.
I didn't either. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say that it looked to me like an opportunity to do some good work. I had a kind of a gut feeling that the government in the state of Indiana at the local level could be made more efficient and be able to serve the public better. Mm-hmm. And I was willing to spend some time to see if we could work that out.
And John?
I was honored to be asked to participate in the process. Thought I had something to bring to the table with 30 plus years of experience most of my career has been in local government at both the city and the county levels, and yes, understood that in all likelihood our final report would not be embraced by everyone with open arms, but thought that the topic was an important one, not just for local government, for the citizens of this state and moving this state forward. We're in a real competitive challenge in the Midwest, including Indiana, and government is a part of addressing that competitive challenge.
And when the governor calls and asks you to perform a service for the state, you got to have a very good reason, at least I do, a very good reason to say no.
When he was able to convince the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court and former Governor Kernan, who had been his opponent in the most recent gubernatorial election, hard-pressed to say no after those two had said yes.
Give us a little bit of the insight of kind of behind the scenes. What were the meetings like? I mean, when you got together with the other 5 members, what was the dialogue like? How did you get started?
Go ahead. I thought one of the key things, and first of all, there was a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of meetings. There was a website that got thousands of hits to it and hundreds upon hundreds of suggestions from the public. We met with, we had public meetings, one here in Fort Wayne, all around the state. So there was a significant input process to our work. But I thought maybe the key thing happened after 2 or 3 months of that input, where the staff, and we were very ably staffed by the Center for Urban Policy and the Environment out of Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. They asked each of us independently for our major ideas. And it became clear when they brought those back to us as a group that there was a tremendous amount of commonality.
Did that surprise you?
Yeah.
Yeah, John and I, in fact, discussed this and were quite concerned about the process, concerned about what might develop from it, and I know in my own case wondered whether I was really at a knowledge level that would enable me to, I think we were to make 10 suggestions, that make 10 really valuable suggestions for improving government. But as John said, it turned out to be a terrific idea, and our concerns about it were misplaced, especially when, as John said, the result of that was the fact that we were all pretty well together on what the report ought to look like.
Let me ask you, just kind of going into this, obviously you have your own experiences and background, your own opinions about local government. How did the public sessions, and I think it was about 700 people from public meetings all over the state had input, thousands of suggestions from the website. How did those change how you kind of looked at your work? Did you personally get any insights from some of those suggestions?
There were some specific ideas that came through those that found their way into the final report. A lot of reinforcement from, and the attendees at those meetings were fairly balanced between citizens that were not directly involved in local government, and a good half of the attendees were office holders or employees of local government. But openness of a lot of the citizens to consider some new ways of doing things. And they were different in each community. The session we had here in Fort Wayne was different than the one I attended in Gary. Different issues percolated up from different parts of the state.
Yeah, I thought the public's, well, I attended the one here in Fort Wayne. And what you found were, first of all, more people came than I thought might be the case, because oftentimes issues like this meet with a lot of public apathy. But it was clear that there was an interest in this subject. We had people representing groups that potentially were going to be affected by the report. And I'd say that particularly the library people showed a great deal of concern and involvement in what was going to happen to libraries. So I learned a lot from them in terms of how they operate, coverage in the state, where we learned that a significant part of the state has no library service at all. It just seems to me that that shouldn't be the case. So, and citizens from many walks of life came, and obviously they were interested, and it said to me, this is a subject that ought to be addressed.
I want to ask one more question before we get to some of the specific recommendations in the report. That is, the commission was charged with looking at this in a certain way, in terms of looking at effectiveness, accountability was important, efficiency, cost savings to some extent. Did you find with the public input, from either from the website or from the public meetings, did you find that there was a divergence or a commonality in terms of what the public expected out of this versus what the commission was charged to think about?
I think you got to take into account the environment we were operating in. It was an environment in which people were concerned about taxes, particularly property taxes. There was a lot of concern about, the level of tax that people were going to be paying under the new property tax system. And so I think that had a lot to do with the fact that there was so much concern about cost and taxes, and probably more concern about that than there was about efficiency. Some of us on the commission, maybe all of us on the commission, may have turned that around, but it still indicated that people do care about their taxes and are concerned about it right now.
One of the reinforcing things that I heard out of that, which is common sense to all of us when we think about it, control the cost of local government, but this is my favorite service, and don't touch that.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about some of the recommendations. 27 in all. I'm going to ask you both, get it in brief, what was the most important recommendation? I mean, if any one thing had to be accomplished urgently, it would be what? John?
For me, it is making county government more accountable. We have the very traditional Jacksonian long ballot. We elect a lot of people in county government. One of the guiding principles were if you set policy, if you have a role in setting taxes, that ought to be an elected official. But if you operate in administrative function, that ought to be appointed. And in county government, we have a real mixing of those. We elect a lot of administrators, but not all of them. And we have just a lot of elected officials. Probably key to all of that is having a single elected county administrator, someone at the top of the administrative, not the legislative, but the administrative side of county government that can run the ship, affect change, elected based on their platform, their leadership, and then have to stand on their record.
Ian, let me ask you the same question. Most important
Yeah,
recommendation?
very similar to John's answer. I think the most important recommendation is the one for a single county executive to replace the current 3 commissioner setup. I don't think we create organizations with three people trying to run them, and the single county exec will will create more accountability. People will know who to hold responsible, and then related to that is the idea that administrative functions are appointed, policy-making functions are elected, and only policy-making elected officials are able to set taxes.
In addition to streamlining the executive level, there's also a recommendation really that kind of strengthens the county council. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We put a lot of stock in county government. We think that in the future, a lot of things are going to gravitate to county government for a variety of reasons in this state. But for those to be met successfully, we think the structure of county government needs to be addressed. There's nowhere else that someone is both an administrator and a legislator other than in county government. And part of that proposal is to give the legislative functions of the county commissioners to the county council. They play a somewhat unusual role today. They only have fiscal matters. You can't have, obviously, if you have a single county administrator, they can't be a legislative body as one person. But there is a body right there that, and in fact, in two of our counties, in St. Joe and Lake County, county council is already the legislative body. I think that ought to be carried across the state.
One point I'd emphasize is that we're not being critical of the people that are trying to run government and trying to get things done. I say people who run for public office are doing kind of a thankless job. They don't get a lot of appreciation for it, and they're working with a system that's over 100 years old and is substantially out of date in many areas. So they're struggling to make things happen in a system that's flawed. So I think we want to make it clear that we do value those people that are in the system. We're not being critical of them. We're criticizing and recommending changes for the system.
That's a very good point. Another recommendation talks about and really has major ramifications for township government. Just talk a little bit about the thought behind that part of the recommendation.
I think for most of us, that was a no-brainer. That the township structure is a relic of the past that really isn't needed today, and adds structure to government. And we felt we could get more accountability, more efficiency by eliminating that function and transferring it, a lot of what they do, to the county, under the direction of the county executive who you can hold accountable. So, the criticism of that recommendation is that government that's closest to the people is generally the best, and that the argument is county or the township trustees are closer to the grassroots than anybody else. But our response has been how many people can name their township trustees, or how many could name the people that are on the trustees advisory board. You find not very many, so maybe it's not as close to the grassroots as they try to claim.
That's a good point, but it's such a logical argument. I mean, it's one of those things that seems to make so much sense that, yeah, they're closer to the people, so that's actually better in terms of representative government.
Representative government works when you have access to your elected officials and you know who they are and what they do. And I think, and that's clearly one of the guiding principles. We have so much local government in Indiana that perhaps we've blurred the understanding of it among the electorate, and the who does what ability to who do I go to for this issue. And perhaps if we have fewer elected officials, but we know who they are, what they do, we actually increase the amount of true representation that we get.
And in the process, cut down on the number of people they're voting for. You get fewer people, they'll have a better knowledge of who they're voting for and what these people do.
While we're on the subject of voting, there are the recommendations that also change the cycle of voting for certain offices. Didn't seem like a major thing, but it also makes sense. What was the thinking that went into that?
I think the recommendation had to do primarily with the school board elections, and I think our view was that we would get more participation in the school board elections by changing the dates, so that maybe get some expense saving out of it, but I don't think that's the most important thing. I think you're getting more people out to vote for school board members, and that's got to be a good result.
Many of our school boards today hold their elections during the primary election, and there are just a lot of people in Indiana because, generally speaking, you could go in and vote for the school board. Else, most people believe I've got to declare party preference when I vote in the primary, and a lot of people are just very reluctant to do that, and that goes to Ian's point. That cuts down in the participation in the school board races, and which are nonpartisan. Move those to the fall, you take that issue away.
I want to talk about another issue we touched on a little bit earlier, and that is the idea of only elected officials having say over taxes and tax policy or tax increases. Was there much debate about that, or is that, again, kind of a common sense thing that everyone agreed on?
I'd say it was common sense. It's an attempt to create accountability and give the voters the opportunity to exercise their views about the performance of elected officials. So it was discussed and debated, but at the end of the day, I think all of us were very comfortable and bought into that idea.
Yeah.
Again, really able to reach consensus on that pretty quickly. Just nobody was a strong champion that somebody who is appointed ought to be able to impact your tax bill.
I'd say the one that got the most discussion was the idea of appointing the sheriff. And we decided to go for it. We don't elect the chief of police in municipalities. The concept and the theory is the same in the county. Now, we knew that one was going to get attention and be controversial, but we put it out there for discussion.
And the idea, too, also is to have a county-wide police force, basically, or county-wide. That
one, I think, has been misunderstood a bit. It's not quite that simple. We spend probably outside of schools, and more of that is now state funding with the legislation that recently passed, on public safety functions than most anything else in local government. But we in most counties here in Indiana have a very complex, overlapping, hard to understand, not very uniform system of providing for public safety. Townships provide EMS and fire protection in some areas, municipalities do. We have the role of the county sheriff, we have municipal police forces, very uneven level of service. As one of the members of the commission said, it really matters in Indiana where you have a heart attack as to whether or not you're going to make it. It's to have in each county a group of people that would be led, a board that would be led by that single county executive to plan for the most efficient provision of those. How it's done will differ in every county. You may continue to have municipal police forces, a county police force. You may have many providers of EMS and fire protection, but in a more coordinated system. Today, sometimes they talk to each other, sometimes they don't.
And technology feeds into that as well.
And we spend a tremendous amount of money in this state on particularly fire equipment. Are we doing as efficiently as we could, or is it each entity having to meet all of its own needs where there could be some more sharing than there is today?
I'm going to talk a little bit about the reaction to the report, but first I want to ask you both, get an opinion from each of you. 27 recommendations. If there had been 28, Ian, let me ask you first, what would have been your 28th?
I didn't have a burning issue that didn't get considered. Government in Indiana is so complicated. I'm sure there are issues out there that we didn't address, but I felt that we had tackled the main issues, and that it was going to be a real task to get the ones we'd already put out there implemented. So I really can't identify anyone that I'd add to the list and argue strongly for it.
John, anything that...
there have been a couple of things that have been brought to my attention since the report has been done. We didn't address the issue of whether the clerk treasurer in third-class cities ought to be an elected or appointed position. I think if I were to go back, I'd make the argument that those ought to be appointed positions. Mm-hmm. But I would point more to the guiding principles. As was noted in the news conference when this report was released, this ought to be the start of the discussion. Nobody ought to take those 27 points as the final word. Right. There were 7 of us. There are over 3 million residents of the state. Weigh in. Get involved. We think the guiding principles are really important. We think highly of the recommendations, but recognize there's a process those will go through. So whether it's 25 or 27 or 30,
and there are people out there with different bodies of knowledge and experience and background than we had on the commission. That's entirely possible that, and I think we found this with the public input, that the public input is valuable. Mm-hmm. And what we've done here, hopefully, is get a process started that will produce some part of these recommendations and consideration of the structure of government. One of the things that we learned early on in the process is there was another one of these studies done in, I think, 1935.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
And you know what happened to that? No. Well, it didn't produce much. And what we don't want to see is this report get put on the shelf and everybody say, well, it was a nice job. But we're going to go on the way we were. We hope this produces some valuable and constructive change.
Got to about 2 minutes left. I want to ask both of you, what have you thought about the reaction that you've heard so far, whether it's from just the random person on the street, saying, hey, Ian, hey, John, I saw the report and I think this, or the media. Just in a general sense, what's been your reaction to the reaction?
I think it's been pretty good. The people I've talked to, I think, generally understand the need for some change. So I think that is out there. Like a lot of reports like this, it got a lot of publicity when it first came out. Right. And then it's kind of gotten forgotten because of other issues. And I hope that it gets resurrected, that it will get before this next session of the General Assembly. And I hope that people will get over their narrow self-interest and try to figure out what's best for the state.
John, just a few seconds left.
Public policy gets, at the end of the day, it really gets accomplished by those who engage in the process. I hope the citizens engage in this process. If we're left to those, on one hand, who wanted to defend the status quo and are heavily involved, and a few interests that are looking for reform, then we've missed the opportunity here for it's our government. It's not government for the citizens. It's the citizens' government. Mm-hmm. And it should be responsive to their needs, not a be-all and end-all in itself. And I hope this is a platform in which people will engage.
John Stafford, Ian Rolland, thanks for your time, and thanks for your service to the state as part of this commission. Some very important work, and like you said, this is just the beginning. I'm Vince Robinson. Thanks for joining us for this half hour. This program was brought to you by City TV, Government Access Television, and the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne. This is the first in a series of programs where we'll have 4 more programs allowing different units of government and the public to actually weigh in on this commission report. Again, thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.